Johnny Carson was trying to conduct a normal interview about Dean Martin's upcoming Vegas shows when Dean suddenly stood up from his chair, grabbed Johnny's coffee mug and poured what everyone thought was coffee, but turned out to be straight bourbon all over the desk while slurring something incomprehensible about improving the furniture. The audience laughed nervously, thinking it was Dean's famous drunk act. But when Frank Sinatra rushed on stage from the wings where he'd been waiting for his segment and physically tried to escort Dean off, everyone realized this wasn't part of the show. What happened next made NBC executives ban the footage for 15 years and caused the Rat Pack's most embarrassing moment ever broadcast on live television. September 19th, 1973. The Tonight Show was riding high with its Wednesday night taping, and Dean Martin was scheduled as the lead guest to promote his new NBC variety show and upcoming Vegas residency at the MGM Grand. The audience was particularly excited. Dean Martin appearances were always gold, his seemingly drunk persona perfectly playing off Johnny's straight man setups. What made tonight special was that Frank Sinatra was also booked, waiting in the green room for the second segment. The two Rat Pack members appearing together always meant legendary television. Dean had arrived at NBC Studios around 4 p.m. for the 5:30 taping, which several staffers later said was unusual. He typically showed up minutes before going on. He'd spent the pre-show time in his dressing room with what his handler called vocal preparations, though the empty bourbon bottles found later suggested otherwise. The makeup artist noticed his hands shaking slightly as she powdered his face, and his personal assistant kept offering him mints. But these were subtle signs. Dean Martin always seemed a little loose. It was part of his charm. The show opened perfectly. Johnny's monologue killed with jokes about the gas crisis and Watergate, the audience primed and ready. When Johnny announced Dean Martin, the band launched into Ain't That a Kick in the Head, and Dean strolled out with his signature casual swagger. But those watching carefully might have noticed he gripped the curtain for a half-second before entering, and his path to the guest chair wasn't quite the smooth glide everyone expected. He sat down heavily, adjusting his tie with movements that seemed just a bit too deliberate. "Dean, wonderful to have you back," Johnny said, settling into the interview. "I hear Vegas is treating you well." "Vegas treats me like a king, Johnny," Dean replied, his words flowing together slightly more than usual. "Course, sometimes the king needs a little lubrication." He mimed drinking, getting the expected laugh, but held the gesture a beat too long. The interview proceeded with Dean promoting his show, telling a story about a golf game with Bob Hope. But he kept reaching for Johnny's coffee mug, each time pulling back and making it seem like a bit. The audience was enjoying it, unaware that Dean's handler was standing in the wings making increasingly frantic gestures to the producers. "You know what this show needs, Johnny?" Dean suddenly interrupted mid-question, his voice louder than necessary. "More atmosphere. More ambiance." He stood up abruptly, swaying slightly, and reached across Johnny's desk for the coffee mug. "Dean, that's my—" Johnny started, but Dean had already grabbed it. "Coffee's for quitters, Johnny boy," Dean slurred. And that's when everyone could smell it, bourbon, strong and unmistakable, wafting from what was supposed to be Johnny's coffee. Dean poured the contents across Johnny's desk in a wavering line. "See? Now it's christened, like a ship, the SS Carson." The audience laughed uncertainly. Was this a bit? Dean's drunk act had always been part of his persona, but this felt different. Johnny's smile was frozen, his eyes darting to Fred de Cordova in the wings. The producer was making a keep-going motion, but his face was concerned. "Dean, why don't we sit back down and—" Johnny tried to guide Dean back to his chair, but Dean pulled away. "You know who's a real friend, Johnny?" "Frank." "Where's Frank?" "Frank!" Dean shouted toward the wings. "Come out here, Pally. Tell Johnny about Vegas. Tell him about the time with the showgirls and the—" "Dean's obviously in high spirits tonight," Johnny interjected quickly, trying to steer things back. But Dean wasn't done. He loosened his tie completely, letting it hang askew, and started unbuttoning his shirt. "It's hot in here, Johnny." "Why's it so hot? You trying to cook us?" Dean's words were running together now. "I had a few drinks, sure. Man's gotta prepare for show business. You understand, don't you, Johnny? You drink. Everyone drinks. 'Cept Joey Bishop. He's too square." Ed McMahon shifted uncomfortably at his desk. Doc Severinsen had stopped smiling entirely. The audience was dead quiet now, realizing this wasn't part of any act. Dean Martin was genuinely, thoroughly drunk, far beyond his usual controlled persona. That's when Frank Sinatra appeared at the edge of the stage, not entering fully but visible enough that the cameras caught him. His face was dark with anger, and something else, embarrassment. He was gesturing urgently to Dean, trying to get his attention without being obvious to the cameras. "Dean, Dean!" Frank's voice cut through from the wings, sharp and commanding. "Get over here, now!" "Frankie!" Dean spun toward the voice, nearly losing his balance. "Ladies and gentlemen, the chairman of the board is here. Come on out, Frank. Tell them about last night. Tell them what we did with those bottles of—" "Dean!" Frank's tone was ice. He stepped fully onto the stage now, his jaw clenched, moving with purpose toward his friend. The cameras caught everything. Frank Sinatra, usually the epitome of cool, looking genuinely panicked. "What's wrong, Pally?" Dean threw an arm around Frank's shoulders, but Frank shrugged it off immediately. "You mad about something? Was it the thing with Nancy? I told her it was just a joke." "Stop talking," Frank hissed, audible to the boom microphones. He turned to Johnny. "We need to go to commercial." Johnny was already standing. "Folks, we'll be right back after—" "No, no, no." Dean pushed past Frank toward Johnny's desk. "We're not done. I got stories. I got great stories. You want to hear about Marilyn? I got Marilyn stories that would make your hair—" He stumbled, catching himself on the desk, knocking over Johnny's name placard and sending cards flying. "He's been drinking since noon," Frank said quietly to Johnny, but the microphones picked it up. "His wife left him yesterday. Took the kids. He's not handling it well." The audience gasped. This wasn't public knowledge. Dean Martin, the smooth crooner with the perfect life, was falling apart on national television. Several people in the front row could see tears starting to form in Dean's bloodshot eyes. "Jean's gone," Dean said, his voice cracking, all bravado suddenly evaporating. "Did I tell you Jean's gone, Johnny? 24 years and she's gone. Said I love the bottle more than her. Maybe she's right. Hell, the bottle never criticized my singing." Frank's face cycled through emotions, anger, embarrassment, but finally settling on something unexpected. Fear. Fear for his friend who was destroying himself on live television. "Dean, please," Frank said, and it might have been the first time anyone had heard Frank Sinatra say please on television. "Let's go. Let me take you home." "Home?" Dean laughed bitterly, swaying dangerously. "Which home, Frank? The one Jean took? The one in Palm Springs I can't remember buying? Or maybe the bar stool at the Polo Lounge?" He turned back to the audience, spreading his arms wide. "That's my real home, folks. Bottom of a glass." Suddenly, Dean's legs gave out. He didn't fall dramatically. He just crumpled, sliding down against Johnny's desk, until he was sitting on the studio floor. The audience screamed. Johnny immediately dropped to his knees beside him, all pretense of hosting gone. Dean, are you okay?" Johnny's voice was urgent. "I'm fine, just tired," Dean mumbled, but his eyes were unfocused. "So tired of pretending, Johnny. 56 years old and I'm tired of being Dino. You know I haven't been sober for a show in 10 years? Not once." Frank knelt beside them, and the cameras captured something nobody had ever seen. Frank Sinatra crying. Not dramatically, just tears running down his face as he held his friend's shoulders. "Why didn't you call me, you stupid bastard? Why didn't you tell me it was this bad?" "Because you'd have tried to fix it," Dean said, his voice barely a whisper now. "And I don't want to be fixed, Frank. I want to disappear." The studio was in complete chaos. Fred de Cordova was screaming, "Cut to commercial, cut the feed." NBC finally went to a test pattern, but not before capturing Johnny Carson, saying into his lapel mic, "Get an ambulance, now." What the home audience didn't see was Dean trying to stand, insisting he was fine, then vomiting on the Tonight Show stage. They didn't see Frank and Johnny physically carrying Dean off stage while he cried about his children not loving him anymore. They didn't see the audience, some crying, some frozen in shock, as they witnessed the complete destruction of a legend. "This is my fault," Frank kept saying. "I knew he was bad. I knew, and I let him come anyway, because I thought the show would help. God, what have we done?" Johnny, still on the floor where Dean had collapsed, looked directly at the audience and said quietly, "Sometimes the show shouldn't go on." The red on-air light stayed dark for 12 minutes, the longest unplanned interruption in Tonight Show history. In the studio, paramedics had arrived and were checking Dean's vitals while he sat slumped in a chair backstage, Frank holding his hand. The audience had been asked to remain seated, NBC executives unsure whether to continue taping or send everyone home. Johnny returned to the stage alone, his suit jacket off, tie loosened, looking older than his 48 years. He sat on the edge of his desk, not behind it, and spoke to the audience without cards or preparation. "What you just witnessed," he said quietly, "was a man in pain. Not a drunk act, not a bit, but a human being breaking apart. Dean Martin has given us decades of entertainment, and tonight he gave us something else, the truth about what that sometimes costs." Frank came back on stage, his eyes still red. "Dean's stable. They're taking him to Cedars-Sinai for observation." He paused, then looked directly at the cameras, which had started rolling again without announcement. "I want to say something. We've all laughed at Dean's drunk routine for 20 years. We enabled it. We thought it was funny. It stopped being funny a long time ago, and we all knew it." "Should we have stopped the show sooner?" Johnny asked, not rhetorically, but genuinely questioning. "We should have stopped it years ago," Frank replied. "Every time he stumbled, we laughed. Every slurred word was a punchline. We turned his disease into entertainment." His voice was bitter, self-recriminating. "The Rat Pack, we called ourselves. You know what rats do? They desert sinking ships. Well, Dean's been sinking for years, and we just kept booking him for shows." The audience was completely silent. Ed McMahon finally spoke from his desk. "Johnny, do we continue?" Johnny looked at the empty guest chair where Dean had collapsed. "No, we're done for tonight. And maybe we need to think about what we do here, what we celebrate, what we laugh at." He stood up, addressing the audience one final time. "Dean Martin is my friend. He's sick. Not funny drunk, but sick. And if you're watching at home and you see yourself in what happened tonight, please get help. Please." The September 19th, 1973 footage remained locked in NBC's vault for 15 years, finally surfacing in a 1988 documentary about addiction in Hollywood. By then, Dean Martin had been sober for 8 years, having entered Betty Ford immediately after that night. He later called it the gift of humiliation, being so publicly broken that he couldn't pretend anymore. Frank Sinatra never spoke publicly about that night, but his relationship with Dean changed completely. He became Dean's fierce protector during recovery, canceling his own shows to attend Dean's AA meetings, sitting in the back row like any other concerned friend. When Dean received his 5-year sobriety chip in 1978, Frank was there, crying again, but for different reasons. "You saved him," Dean's ex-wife John told Johnny years later. "By letting America see him hit bottom, you saved his life." The incident fundamentally changed The Tonight Show's approach to impaired guests. Johnny instituted what became known as the Dean Martin Protocol. Any guest appearing intoxicated would be quietly removed during commercial breaks, no questions asked, full pay provided. The green room bar was eliminated. Pre-show handlers were assigned to watch for signs of impairment. Johnny never wanted another friend to collapse on his stage. Dean returned to The Tonight Show only once, in 1981, completely sober. The first thing he did was walk to the spot where he'd collapsed and kneel down, touching the floor. "This is where I died," he told Johnny on air, "and where I was reborn." The interview that followed was the most honest of Dean's career, discussing his alcoholism, his recovery, his regrets. No jokes, no personas, just truth. It won an Emmy for Outstanding Individual Achievement in Daytime Late-Night Programming. In his final interview before his death in 1995, Dean was asked about his most embarrassing moment. "September 19th, 1973, he said without hesitation. "The night I showed America who I really was, a drunk who'd been hiding behind charm for 20 years. But you know what? That embarrassment saved me. Johnny Carson and Frank Sinatra watched me hit bottom on live television, and then they helped me climb back up. Sometimes your worst night becomes your best gift,